Welcome back to the Full Moon Podcast. We got a simple one today. My week was crazy. I was down in Newport on draft night, Cooper Flagg's hometown, to watch, his community celebrate him become the number one overall pick. And that's really consumed my whole week. So we got that, some Cooper Flagg talk, and me sharing what it was like to be right there in Newport. And then we got USA basketball video coordinator Anthony Pirone on to just talk some draft and pick his brain. And because he's a guy who's watched these guys and been responsible for cutting up tape of a lot of these guys who got drafted tonight back when they were, 15, 16, just starting to make a name for themselves in the basketball world. So it was a great interview with him. Then we got State of the Moon and no mailbag today. Send me some questions, bastards. Then we got State of the Moon to finish it up. So let's have a day. All right, today is Friday, June 27th, and I had the pleasure of having boots on the ground in Newport, Maine for Cooper Flagg's big night. He was selected, as everyone knows, first overall to the Dallas Mavericks, and man, it was just so cool being there in Newport, seeing the community that was so ready to support him, man. This has been a long time coming, and it's funny when you look at his whole journey. This is a kid in middle school who pops up, and he's your above average middle school standout. The kid who's dunking in middle school. Anytime someone dunks in middle school, you're like, okay, hey, is this kid going to be a hooper? He's dunking in 7th, 8th grade. He's got potential. You know what I mean? That's almost like a benchmark in middle school. But then he keeps going, brings Nokomis, his high school, their first ever state championship as a freshman with his brother Ace and his older brother Hunter. And from there, the legend just continues to grow. I mean, he just keeps getting better, keeps getting bigger. I mean, everyone at this point has heard Scalabrini's story about how he brings a 14-year-old Flagg who was busting ass against Maine guys up here in VZ at Results Basketball down to Boston to hang with some guys who could really hoop and were grown men and was holding his own. And, I mean, the legend grew from there, right? He goes to Montverde, wins a national championship his junior year, reclassifies, goes to Duke, and it's just indescribable to think that this kid is from Newport, Maine, a small town Maine. Really, I mean, as someone who, this is the reality for most towns in Maine, but a lot of towns in Maine are through towns. A lot of people know Newport for that McDonald's, outstanding McDonald's, by the way. I mean, one of the best McDonald's in the state. They got a good thing going on over there. And some of these, just almost like a through town where if you're on your way to Moosehead, or you're on your way up to Bangor, it's a convenient spot to get off and get some food. And that's the reality for a lot of towns up and down 95 and 295 in Maine. You know what I mean? So to know and think that the number one overall pick, one of the best prospects in years, came from Newport is just you can't even I'm speechless. I can't even find the right word for it because it's just actually insane to even try to think about and digest, even though you've known it's been coming for a while. Like, I think when people really started to see and realize how big he was really going to get was when he started being the hoop mixtape guy. When you started seeing these edits pop up as, he's running through the AAU circuit dominating, you're like, this is insane because from Maine, reaching the level of, a Zion Williamson type mixtape, a Austin Rivers type mixtape, I guess to relate to some younger guys, Mac McClung, right? That's fairy tale land. Those guys are like myths, right? You see them, you're never going to see them in person unless you wait till they go to the NBA or maybe you catch them in college. They're just not real. And then all of a sudden, the guy who's at the center of all these videos, all these mixtapes, is your very own, your neighbor, you could say, in Maine. He's a Mainer. And it's just, that was when it first kind of got real, where you're like, holy shit, this is like, he's reaching these heights that you thought were, no one from Maine would ever do. You don't even consider, the closest thing you got to athletes doing that level is if you go down to Massachusetts, but that's obviously not a part of Maine. I mean, it used to be back in the day, but to have our own guy is incredible. And I think still, I truly think that Flagg, when he looks back on his career, through all the number one pick, going to a Final Four, being a star at Duke, hopefully, some NBA championships, hopefully he ends up being a Hall of Famer. I could imagine that when he looks back in that Hall of Fame speech, one of the most proud things he's going to have in his basketball career is just bringing a bunch of kids from Maine on the AAU circuit and bringing them to national heights, national championship contenders. It was Cooper Flagg, his brother Ace, and then a bunch of guards from Maine who are playing D2, D3 ball, man. I mean, some don't even play past high school in that. It's insane the way he carried them. And don't get me wrong, there were some good players on that squad. Some players that owned their role, were shooters, playing defense. It obviously doesn't just happen because of Coop and Ace. But I still think that that's almost miraculous. And again, unheard of, will never happen again. A team from Maine will obviously never be in the damn finals of a national AAU tournament again. It's just not going to happen. Peach Jam finals. It's incredible to even think back and remember. But back to just being there in Newport, people were going nuts, man. He is truly the hometown hero. I mean, as good as it gets in Maine to be a hometown hero, you're going and you're playing a Division I sport. That's about as big as it gets. Maine's had a couple Olympians. Brian Dumoulin is almost a guy who flies under the radar. Won a state championship in hockey. Went on to win a national championship with BC. Won a couple cups with the Penguins. And obviously, hockey's not as popular of a sport as basketball, but Dumoulin's probably the most decorated athlete from Maine, at least in recent history. But Coop is just blowing everybody out of the water because number 1 overall pick puts you in elite company that is, in my opinion, is more elite than qualifying for the Olympics, right? I think it's heights that no one could even imagine ever reach. So the emotion to be there, it was so cool to see Marty Smith, and especially as someone who, and we're going to get to more of this in State of the Moon, but especially as someone who is aspiring to be a professional in the sports media world, to see the whole ESPN setup and see Marty do his thing and the way he interacts with people, the way he goes about his business, the way he prepared for a hit, that was awesome. Like I really look up to Marty Smith, and I'll save the rest of this rant for State of the Moon. But there's not much more you can say than unbelievable. They were freaking out. He now represents Newport, right? He represents Maine. Wherever he goes, Maine is, a part of him. We kind of see ourselves now as whatever he does, we get to claim it. And it's the coolest thing ever. And like I talked about yesterday in Walks with Webb, it's a Maine basketball community specifically that deserves someone like this, someone to reach these heights. And because it's a special place. All you have to do is go to the high school tournament in the winter, and you'll see how cool and special this Maine basketball community is. Full town shut down for a day. It's obviously not numbers-wise as big as in Indiana, but the love is there. Full towns will come down to a tournament game or even just go to a Friday night, gym at any point during the season. You're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm just happy that they have someone representing them. It used to be us tucked into this corner. No one really talked about us. They knew about us for our lobster, and people would come summer here because it's obviously gorgeous. Why wouldn't you? But I'm just glad the Maine basketball community, the Maine sports community has someone like this who's reaching, the top. So it's just great. I could rant on and on about just how amazing it was, the individual things, the people crying when he gets drafted. Like when his name was called, the energy was there, but when his name was called was just like pure emotion. Like obviously they were going crazy during Marty's live hits during the draft, but when Coop's name was called, it was a moment I'll never forget in my life, and I just feel lucky to have boots on the ground and be there to witness it. So last thing I want to sneak in before the draft is, before we kick it to Anthony Pirone, USA basketball video coordinator. Great interview today with him. But one more thing I got to talk about the draft is the Charlotte Hornets, because we're going to touch on a lot of this with Anthony. But the Hornets conducted probably the most. Let me restart this because that's not exactly how I want to say it. The Charlotte Hornets. Okay, you know what? We're just going to clip farm. We're going to actively clip farm right here. The Charlotte Hornets gave you see, I don't even like that one. We're struggling through. I'm not even going to cut this either because this is what we're about here on the Full Moon. We're working through the kinks. The Charlotte Hornets, though, I'm just going to get to the point, conducted probably the exact draft that a fan would want. Big names. Knipple, Cockbrenner in the second round from Creighton, McNeely from UConn. Those are big names that if you follow college basketball, those three names. Whether you watch Big East ball, ACC ball, or you just tune in for the tournament, those are guys that were talked about during the NCAA tournament. And every time your team is going up to draft, you almost hope, just as a fan-wise, And this is before, you never know how these guys are going to pan out. Sometimes the no names are turn out to be the best NBA players, right? But when your team's drafting, you're kind of hoping it's a name. It's a name guy. Like some Celtics fans are disappointed when they don't get McNeely. They wanted McNeely to. They wanted the Celtics to choose McNeely. They choose a guy from Spain who, in the long run, could be way better for the Celtics than McNeely would have been. But you want McNeely, right? You're like, that's a household name. He went to UConn. I'm familiar with him, and it's just more fun. It's fun to draft a guy who you watched in college. And I think the Charlotte Hornets fans should be loving it, because not only do I think they made the right picks for their team, but their fans also get the name brand, some people that they know and watched in college. So it's a win for Hornets fans, and that's a dream draft as a fan. So that's kind of the point I was trying to get across. But you know what? Enough babbling. Newport was unbelievable on draft night. It's going to be something I'll never forget. But let's kick it to USA Basketball video coordinator Anthony Pirone. All right, I'm here with my buddy Anthony Pirone, but more importantly, video coordinator for USA Basketball. Anthony, I kind of want to ask you to explain that role a little bit. I don't think the untrained mind or sports fan quite knows maybe what you do for your job.
Yeah, so with USA Basketball, a lot of I get to do a lot of the events from the men's national team all the way to the junior national events, and our calendars every year is different based on, Olympic year, World Cup year, and then so it kind of is just, it varies on, every event that comes around. I'm just kind of the forefront of video and kind of the scouting of it. So a lot of it, with our bread and butter is just being able to onboard people fast in a way that's efficient, because they're usually it's 10 days practice, then you do an event. So it's a lot of what I do is like the organizing on the onboarding. So we have, it's always different coaches, different players, and the kind of way we've kind of onboarded with video and scouting is just like kind of training coaches how FIBA is different, and how like the FIBA game's different, and how how can you onboard them in the fastest way that we need these type of players, because the FIBA game's a little different, more physical. There's just some rule tweaks in the way the game flows. So a lot of my job is obviously onboarding coaches and getting film ready and getting all the scouting ready for, but the scouting part's really hard because, every team's different. You kind of have to guess what player's going to be on each team. But so that's why it's kind of important to just get them warmed up to the FIBA game, just because we don't always know the opponents, and we don't always know the players and the rosters, but we do know what the event's like, and what kind of the structure of how we're going to onboard and how we're going to get 10 practices and go and play. But then there's side projects that we do for, there's obviously always projects, and with the junior national stuff, there's players. We have a lot of players we got to look at all times, and we do camps twice a year in October and April. They're called mini camps, and we got all different ages from high school, and they come, and it's a true 4-day camp where we scrimmage, and it's like a true summer camp, but we get them in the system, and we invite you guys, and so it's when you draft it to, or you put together a team for U16, U17s, U18s, and U19s. You have the inventory, you have the scouting notes, you've had them in under our roof type of deal. But yeah, the long of it is, every year is different, and every event's different. So it's a lot of organizing, and a lot of onboarding is, like I said, is crucial for us.
And it's such a cool thing. It's such like a cool pocket of the basketball world to be a part of, right? And obviously, we're going to get to Coop and how proud we are of him as Mainers, but I think Jack Casale brought it up the other day. We were talking, dude, you're like the forgotten, person in Maine basketball who's out doing great things. You know what I mean? Like, you are directly involved with some of the most elite people in the game of basketball. You're around Eric Spoelstra, you're around Steve Kerr, you're around some of these great players with Team USA. I just kind of want to get your take on how cool this has been for you, man, as just a kid from Maine who, decided to go be a manager and kind of get on the staff over there at Marquette, leads you to Providence, which leads you to this. I mean, you're working with the names that you've once watched on a screen and talked about here in Maine. How cool is that?
Yeah, it is pretty cool, and I guess it's another forgotten story that is pretty cool that maybe I'm biased, but it doesn't get enough coverage. Is a guy named Jimmy McHugh, who he's the basketball ops and advanced scout for the Padres now. He's another Mainer. He grew up in my neighborhood, so I'm really close to his family. But he was the first guy from Cheverus High School to go to Marquette and be a manager. He was a student manager under Buzz Williams, and he was my friend. And so once he got that job, and I saw that he was in basketball and what he did, I go to the Big East tournament every year with my dad, and I saw him, just on the bench, and I always knew I wanted to be a manager. So I give Jimmy McHugh huge credit because Jimmy went, and then we ended up having 6 more guys from Chever's be a manager. I was one of the last ones to do it. So it was like Jimmy McHugh, a guy named Stephen Molina, Michael Flaherty, Derek Hammond, and then myself as a manager at Marquette. So there's a pipeline from Maine that every guy, people from Chever's, more importantly, went to Marquette. The Jesuit connection between the schools, and the opportunity to work in basketball as a student worker was kind of what got me in the door. And I give Jimmy McHugh, he's a good friend of mine, talk to him every day, and another Mainer who's doing great things in sports. So that got the ball rolling. So I mean, that was my opportunity because I don't know many people in the NBA or college before it. So I give a lot of credit for that Marquette pipeline, and that's where it all began. And that's kind of it's the way I got rolling. And then to come back at Providence and in New England, and went on a Sweet 16 run and worked with Ed Cooley. Was I don't know, it was cool. And I've gotten so lucky. And uh, my boss at USA Basketball, Sean Ford, his nephew was a manager at Providence, and he wasn't there when I was there, but I became friends with all of his friends. And next thing the video coordinator left to be with Eric Spoelstra at USA Basketball, and I just graduated at Providence. And next thing you just get in. I got really lucky to kind of be in this world now with USA Basketball, and it's completely different from college and the NBA. So it's fun. It's a fun challenge.
Dude, I didn't know the Chevrolet to Marquette pipeline. That's nuts.
Yeah,
Do not
there.
tell
Like I said,
Travis Lee or Dave Ead about that because I need that story. When the time,
100%. Yeah, it's something that hasn't been covered, but it's so unique and cool. And like I said, it was 5 or 6 guys, and I was just happy to be one of them. So that was my goal. I kept my grades up so I could get into Marquette, or a place where I knew I could be a student manager, and took off from there. So
yeah,
I got lucky.
I mean that's tough to keep your grades up when you got Raf Salamone, trying to
Yeah.
get you to do hood rat shit. But man, we got to dive into this draft because I know you got a hard out here at 2:15. So we got to start with Cooper Flagg, right? And obviously the Mainer, we connect with him because I was just talking with people last night over in Newport. I'm going to talk about it, or I talked about it earlier in the podcast, I should say. Just the experience of being in Newport, small town Maine. This is Maine basketball. The community is special, right? And it's been a long time coming. That's what a couple people were saying that I interviewed last night. And it's almost right that the one time we get a big time NBA player, he's about as big as it gets as a prospect. You were able to watch him. You were the video coordinator for the USA Select team, the team that is put together to practice against the actual team that goes and competes in the Olympics. And I mean, starting from the beginning, actually, you were the video coordinator for some of his U17 teams, and him participating in USA basketball at a young age on his way up, to college, even before that select team stuff. When you first, are doing your stuff, and you see, oh, we got this kid Cooper from Maine, you know what I mean? Let's see what he's about, because it's all fun and games. Everyone was wondering the same thing, right? He's good for Maine. You got curious about him at the next level. Then you actually get to go watch him. You're responsible for breaking down the film of him giving the other best players in the country at his age, in the world for that matter, buckets.
Yeah, it was cool. And it's just funny that I got hired right when kind of Flag was going to the USA Basketball. So people thought I was biased towards him, obviously. But actually the U17 team is pretty interesting because even though I wasn't there quite yet, I had him for the Nike Hoop Summit in 24. But we just did U16s, and there was a gold medal game against Spain, and he was 16 on the 17-year-old team, and he wasn't a starter, but we were playing in Spain, the host country. We were down 10, down 12 in the first half, and Flag came in, right, and he just set the tone. He was the head of a press and in a diamond press, and he got a bunch of steals, bunch of energy plays and winning plays, and he willed us to a win in gold, in over in Spain and Malaga. So it was funny because we just finished up with U16s, and a lot of the film we broke down to prepare these guys, where it's like it's not always easy, it's not always that, and we use so many of the Cooper highlights where it's just like USA, our depth is always what we use. We have 12 guys that play, we platoon people, and we showed the 16-year-old kids this year, where if you're not starting, whatever. And we showed a lot of the clips where Flag got, he got us rolling that gold medal game. So from a young age in USA, he was just, he was crucial for us. And then I got to, a lot of the guys who got drafted last night were on the 24 Nike Hoop Summit team. And, let alone we had a lot of guys on our USA team, but against the world, when we played them, the world team had Malawach, Akachunas, Traore was their point guard. So, it was cool last night to see a lot of these guys on that Hoop Summit team get drafted as well. And just, it was cool to be around them. And with USA, the Hoop Summit's kind of like it's kind of the graduating event where it's like if you if you've been with us and you started at U16, you won a few gold medals. We like to give the guys a benefit and give them that Hoop Summit experience. So obviously Flag and all those guys were, it's a cool event, the Hoop Summit. All 30 NBA teams are there at every practice. You get 4 days of practice and you play against a world team. And I wouldn't say that the Hoop Summit's different because it's not an all-star game. It is in a sense, but there is true pride, and it's a legit game, and people want we want to win that game. And both teams on each side prep like that. So it was cool to see it. And last night it was pretty cool just to know him for a few days and a week, and it was cool to watch him in college, especially. So yeah, Flag, yeah, and it was cool, especially Flag, and just seeing how he grew, and the rallying of the state and the city, it's his Newport, Maine. It was pretty cool.
And I think that's what's awesome, right? And I think again, that's what's so cool about your job is, college basketball fans, that they know these guys when they come in as freshmen, they're making noise. NBA fans, probably guys who don't, because NBA obviously is more popular in college. There are some people who I can't relate to, but strictly just watch the NBA. They're not as interested in the college game. So to your average NBA fan, these are some new names, fresh names, even in the lottery, but you've been seeing them since a young age. And just what do you think? And I kind of want to just touch on Flag one more time, going to the Mavs, right? That's a really interesting situation, right, where he's got some vets, some future Hall of Famers that he's going to get to learn from off rip and compete with. Like, we're probably going to see him year one in some intense Western Conference playoff games. What do you make of his fit with the Mavericks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously, I think it's a really good fit, and I think when you look at his team from Duke this year, I mean, they defensively they're awesome, and now that if you get to pair Flag with Anthony Davis, Gafford, Lively, those bigs, that you're not going to force Flag to play small. I mean, or play big as a smaller forward, which is I think is huge benefit for him because he can play on the perimeter switch and just kind of be a havoc more on the perimeter while you have guys behind him like Gafford, Lively, and Anthony Davis. I mean, I think it's a perfect fit for him to the game can just come to him really easy on that team. And I think that's his best ability is just, take what the game gives him. And he's just so good at that. So I think the fit's great and everything for him. I hope everything goes well for him. But like I said, at Duke, they were great defensively, and it allows him to kind of, you can just kind of unleash, the way he plays on defense and the switching and all that. So I think it's another great fit for him. And I think the team around him is going to be awesome. And like I said, he doesn't need the ball for 20 seconds each possession for him to make an impact on the game. And that's, like I said, at a young age, coming onto the stage as a 16-year-old playing a U17 gold medal game and, the select team practices. So I think it's a great situation for him. He's like I said, he's not going to be asked to do, to score 20, I think, every game. And I think that's the beauty of his game.
Right, that's why people love him as prospect, right? He's just the all around, whatever you kind of need him to do, he can do. And I think just kind of diving deeper in the draft here, I guess we got to start with Knipple, right, at number 4, kind of going earlier than expected to the Charlotte Hornets. He said it himself last night in his press conference, though, that with the ball handlers and those people who are heavy on the ball players in, LaMelo, as well as oh my God, the forward from Charlotte,
Brandon Miller.
Brandon Miller, that he, as a moving, while shooting guy, I think he's going to eat, don't you?
Yeah, I think they got it right, and I was glad to see him get drafted that high because he's kind of like whatever the game gives him, like Cooper, he can just take and do whatever he has to do. And I think like everybody says, most of the draft analysts and the guys that he's just so good off the ball. He knows how to fill space, get open shots just by subtle movements. Like a lift and fill position. And I think in the NBA, that's all. It's really finding space and finding open shots off of movement nowadays so much. And so I think Knipple's really good. But he also, he was, when Cooper got hurt, he could step up and do any role with it. That's possible too. So like I said, his IQ is probably had the best IQ at anybody in the draft, I thought, just in terms of knowing how to play off of what's given to him, but more importantly, just knowing space and getting open just off subtle, like I said, subtle off ball movements, which is huge in the NBA. And I think he'll know his role from day one. So I think he's awesome. And defensively, people don't talk about how good he was all year. And he can use his body to his advantage. So he was never overwhelmed, physically. And I think it's on both ends of the ball. And, obviously he played so hard. So, I think the theme of this draft really was you see so many guys who are just guys who play hard got drafted pretty high last night. Like even the guy, people went to the rafters, Murray Boyle. Like I think people might have been surprised, but he was a guy who just played hard. He can get, he could get 9 rebounds a game just playing hard. Guys guys who just played hard without, without having to score to play hard. Guys who just figured it out. I think was the theme last night. It seems like a lot. So I think Knipple, Flag, and a lot of these guys who just seem to play hard and the ball finds them are the guys who really went high in this draft.
Yeah, Murray Boyle's going number 9 to Toronto. I kind of want to talk about, and I trust me, I understand that you are someone who's rising in this profession. So we're not going to ruffle any feathers with your take on his pre-draft process or anything like that. But Ace Bailey going to 5 with the Jazz didn't seem happy about it. But I mean, Utah had to be happy because what can you say about the talent he has? I mean, it's a guy who even when Coop reclassified, everyone was like, who's going to be number until Coop really I guess made space between him and solidified himself as the number 1 pick. That was the conversation. Is it going to be Ace Bailey? Is it going to be Coop? All of a sudden, Bailey slides to 5. But I mean, I feel like that's if it works out, personality wise and team wise with Ace, that's a great talent for number 5.
Yeah, I think they probably did the right thing. I hope, and the future. You don't know what the future holds, but I think a guy like Ace, I think he doesn't, he doesn't, pressure doesn't get to him, and I think he's just such an easygoing, good guy, and everybody loves to be around him. So I think there's a lot of drama around him, maybe or whatever, but I don't, I don't think it's fair for the kid. But like, I think he's just a guy who plays so loose and so easy and so free. Guys who can make tough shots like that, they have the mental capacity, just the confidence and the capacity where there's a looseness to his game. And I think he's going to be all right in any situation he's in because he can just score. And like I said, he's another guy who just plays hard and he can find points. Even though he's maybe a high usage guy, I think he can still find points wherever it gets to him. And I think he has just a really joyful attitude. I think he'll figure it out because, like I said, guys who play loose and have the confidence like him, I think they do all right in the next level.
And it's so funny, like to talk about these guys where, and this is why we freak out, and it's so cool to see Flag because these are guys who are out in fairy tale land, right? Like these are people that as athletes don't know as people. You get to know these guys as who they are as young men, right? That's got to be one of the coolest parts. And do you enjoy? Is that one of the parts you really enjoy about is getting to know who they are? Like you talk about how people love being around Ace Bailey and how he's a joy to be around. That's got to be cool to understand these guys on a personal level.
100%. Yeah, he's definitely he has one of the bigger personalities on any team he's going to be. So he's just a guy who everybody gravitates towards him because of his personality, and it is cool. But I think USA just does a good job. We give him such high level structure at a young age. When we do even the Nike Hoop Summit game, it's not like I said, it's not treated like an all-star game because we got 4 days of practice, 3 days of doubles, and we're showing film. We give them scouting reports. We do it kind of like a college process or an NBA process. Even our U16 team, we do it that same way. We do personnel, we do scouting, we do go over sets, we walk through the sets. So I think more than just their personality and who they are, you get to understand that. You give them the opportunity, like, hey, you got to be on time. Our film's at this time. You got to do this. We're going to do that. So I think, the benefit of what we do of USA is kind of seeing them how they can handle it and how they can be mature on their own because a lot of our events is maturity based. And like I said, being on time is huge. And these guys, like the Nike Cube Summit, they're going into be freshmen in college. And I think the structure we give them at such a young age is so cool. And you can see who handles it better. And I think so many scouts and NBA people love USA basketball. Like when they're watching film on these guys, I think I'd probably say a lot of, some guys prefer watching USA film because they're on a roster with 11 guys who are just as good as them and see how they can fit. And that's the evaluation you need to do as an NBA people. It's like how, a guy who's the number 1 option in college as a freshman, I don't know how much you can tell, you can get a gauge of who they are and what type of player they are. But I think at USA, it's like, it's a huge stepping stone for these guys to see how they can handle the everyday, maturity level. And, I think it's huge, and I think we have so many scouts, and they love hearing from us, and all of our events are really well attended by NBA scouts, obviously because of that that factor. So you get to know their personality, but you also get to know their maturity level at a young age, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. And now, to the untrained basketball eye, you talk about there's really levels to basketball, right? Like I see a guy like Liam McNeely slide all the way to 29 going to the Suns. It doesn't quite make sense to me. Do you have maybe an idea of maybe is there something about his game that made him slide? Because to me, it seems like that's a steal at 29, right?
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think, since I went to Providence and Marquette, I watched a ton of Big East basketball, and I was impressed that he was kind of the alpha on that team, and he was but not even just being an alpha on a team, he was an alpha on a team who runs high level stuff and NBA type offense, and being able to be kind of a main focal point in that. I think that showed how big his upside could be in the NBA. And like, I do think it could have been a slip, but I think his fit's pretty good with where he went. But at the same time, like I said, there's offenses that you can see them mold and gel in college, and it's a huge benefit for NBA guys to see how he operated in that offense. So I think it was huge, and he has a different competitive edge. Like he's a guy that teams would hate because of his attitude, his confidence. So I think it was pretty cool to see him play this year in the Big East, but definitely you could say he slept.
Do you know anything about this Yang Hansen from China? Did you ever play against him? Or I mean, people are talking about him like he's the Chinese Jokic.
Yeah, no, didn't know much about him at all until last night. And the highlights I showed last night, I mean, the guy who can, come out of the paint, play in high ball situations and DHOs and now is the most valuable aspect for, I think, bigs now. Even though if you can't shoot three, it's just valuable to have the ball in your hand when you do DHOs and pick and rolls and like that. If you're able to lift like that, I think that's why he went so high. If you can pass too, it's just an added bonus. But, even a guy like Luke Cornett, who's just so good with, he's really good because he can have the ball in his hands and he knows how to facilitate the offense as a big. And I think that's the way the NBA is going. So it's like, I think that was his upside, and that's definitely why he jumped that high. And at the end of the day, I think an important thing to touch on is I think if you look at the stats, I think big guys who are rookies in the NBA get definitely more minutes than guards, and they get more of a chance. Like I think this past year, you look at Edie, Klingon, even a guy like Quentin Post for the Warriors and Osei Ighodaro for the Suns they play huge minutes, and I think bigs are very valuable now. So I think that that's why I think some of the bigs that went last night are they all can play. Like I said, lifted from the high post. They don't have it ain't just catching on the block and go. Like you look at all the guys, even though the last pick last night, the guy from Penn State, uh, he's just a guy who can play from the high post, but his value was definitely just because he has a chance to play next year. And I think these bigs that can play like that, I think they're going to get a chance definitely more than guards if you look at it like the history of the league as right.
How about our for the Celtics, our guy Hugo? And listen, I might not know much about international basketball. When I saw he was playing for Real Madrid, I go, okay, that's a good
Yeah,
thing. That's got
yeah,
to mean he's a high level player. What do you know about him?
100%. I think that like I think a year ago I think he was projected top 10. So I mean there was a lot of buzz with him a year ago and maybe he slipped. I don't know too much about him, but when you play in the EuroLeague and even you're a role player like he was, you can learn a lot through his personality and like I said, his maturity. Like he's gone through the grind, he's gone through the struggle in the EuroLeague, and I think I think it's a good stash pick for them as of right now. And I think people just say he's like a Hawkes type of guy who just plays hard, and I think that's huge for the Celtics because some of their wings are just a lot of they're they play really solid defense, but maybe a more of a defensive mind they're thinking, and a guy who's matured. And like I said, when you go through a EuroLeague schedule, I think you're pretty ready to make a jump. So it was interesting for sure. But then they got another pick here early in the second round. So like I said, talking about bigs, I love Ryan Kalkbrenner, and I think with the uncertainty at the center, he's a guy who's went he was in college for a long time. He's old, and he was a guy at Creighton, like just like UConn. They run such high level offense. Like McDermott's one of the best, so he's a guy that I would hope the Celtics take a swing at. And he's a guy even though he's a big and he's not polished shooting, dribbling, all that. He's a guy who he can play with the ball in his hands and facilitate offense like Cornette. And he puts so much pressure on the rim with the lob threat. And I think he's just so valuable in the NBA. So, I think it would be a good fit for the Celtics. I don't know if they trade the pick or whatever, but Kalkbrenner, I think, to go early in the second round would be I would put, my bet would be that he's going to go early in this. And like I said, I think he'd be great for the Celtics. And, that Creighton culture is great. And like I said, he could be somebody who could legit play, 8 to 10 minutes easy next year.
Yeah, I love that. And the Celtics, I mean, I hope they find a way to figure out the Cornet stuff because I mean, I bought a Cornet jersey after that Cornet game against the Knicks. But can I ask you a question? And I don't think it's too personal, so I think you'll be able to answer it. In the people you talk to a lot of basketball people, right? And we've discussed this, and a lot of high up basketball people. Is Brad Stevens from you? Maybe do you get a vibe that is he one of the more respected GMs around the league? Like the stuff he does really is pretty nuts.
Yeah, it's not too personal at all. And I think Goodwin was on NBC Boston yesterday, and I think he said a great, when he's talking to college coaches, nobody lies to him because he's been in college and He does his homework so well. So I think, when you're gathering intel on guys, I think he gets the best intel. And I think definitely the characters on it that he's drafted, when you look at Hauser, Shireman, a lot of I think he's a huge high character guy. So I think, he doesn't get lied to when he's digging in for these people and the prospects. So I think that's why what separates him from many GMs, because he does the homework. But like I said, he has such a good connection with college coaches. He treats everybody with great respect. He's not a guy who's going to get fooled on stuff. So I think that's definitely the benefit of having a guy like Stevens. So yeah, that's really what I would say his benefit is that he does his homework, but like I said, the respect with all the college coaches is just at a different level for him.
Which is awesome. And I think that probably wraps up our draft talk. Anything we didn't talk about that you were like when you came on, you wanted to get to, or do we kind of cover all the bases there?
Yeah, well, I think another slip with Asa Newell. I think he was a guy like another guy who just plays hard. He can find 10 rebounds a game, and he's such a good kid. And I was pretty surprised for him to go that low. But I think he's in a decent situation with Atlanta because Capella might be a free agent, and a few other guys who they might need some spot minutes. And it just depends how teams play too. If you put like a guy like Newell on the Warriors who plays small ball, he could be really good for a team. But other than that, I mean, I think it's interesting. The Nets, I mean, they might get a lot of criticism because they had 5 picks, so you could look at their 5 picks and say, what are they doing? But I don't know. You got to give them the benefit of the doubt because they've been a team who has traded and signed free agents for a long time. So they have a new coach, Fernandez, who was the Canada national team coach, and I just doing all that from the World Cup to the Olympics. I think he's great. So you got to give the Nets a chance because they're trying to do something different with developing guys. So it's hard to see the Nets might not have prior blueprint to say, wow, they've developed guys so well. But so I think it might be too quick to maybe bash them a little bit on night one, but we'll see what happens. That was kind of my takeaways. And Ed Cooley was my former coach, and he had a player Sorber last night get drafted to the Thunder. And I watch a ton of games because of that, and yeah, I think it solidifies that. I think he's a good player that he went to a team like the Thunder, and he's another guy who can, like I said, lift from the high post and can play out of the post and can facilitate the offense. And he's a huge rim protector and one of the best defenders in the draft. So I think he fits the Thunder's mold too. So, like I said, the Thunder picking him at that pick was kind of solidified what I thought about him. But yeah, that was kind of the overall thoughts after night one.
In the Thunder just has the league, in a stranglehold. The way just in every single way, the assets, what they got on the court right now, obviously winning the title, it's nuts, man.
Yeah. So you trust what they do. So I've met Thomas, and I think he's a great kid, and I think defensively he's one of the best bigs that went last night.
Love it. So, okay, that's enough basketball talk. I know you're a big baseball guy. Even though you live out there in Chicago, you're still keeping up with the Sox. I know it was a couple weeks ago at this point, man, but we got to talk Devers trade. What'd you make of it? I know initial reactions, obviously shocked, but as it's died down here, what do you make of it?
I hope the Devers situation is something we look back on and we're happy about. I think we all do. I think it's tough to pill to swallow right now, but more importantly, I think the frustration is just the whole organization. I think, like your dad said on last week, I think the frustration is very warranted. You get sellouts every game, and you might take it for advantage, take that to your advantage, and not put a good product on. But I think you just want to know what the clubhouse feels with Devers, and just seeing the interviews in the media. I don't. People weren't heartbroken. So it's something that I hope you trust what happened was good, and you look back on it and it was an okay move. But if they spent a bunch of money because of this trade, I think we look back on it, we're kind of happy, hopefully. Um, but yeah, it's still frustrating to be at 500 almost right now.
Yeah, what do you make of how they're playing right now? I don't know if you've been able to watch this recent skid they're on this West Coast road trip. Obviously, it started hot. It started like, okay, are we going to get a spark after this Devers thing? They win the Mariners series. They go out to San Francisco, win that game one, and then it's kind of been downhill from there.
Yeah, it's simple with them. It's like if they don't make errors and they play good defense, they typically win. And I think that's been the calling card. So it's like to have drama about Devers playing a position is just the worst thing that I think it's been brutal to hear and talk about because defense has been their worst issue. And even the Giants games they lost over the weekends, it was, there was bad base running, bad defense. And that's what it comes down to, which is so shocking in the MLB. And it should not be an issue at this level. And they're still just trying to plug in guys that I don't know if they really play in that position yet. So I think a lot of the lineups without Bregman can be frustrating. Um, and even their bullpen getting overworked. So I mean, even a guy like Crochet, 7 innings the last 4 starts have been 7 innings, very few runs, and they just can't win. So it's frustrating, and I don't know where you go from it. It's kind of the purgatory they were in last year. So at this point, if you trade Devers, I'd rather, I'd pack it up for next year almost at this point.
I mean, the purgatory since 2018, right? The curse, the curse of the Mookie Betts trade lives on, just being absolutely mid. So
Yeah,
I think that's all we got. You got anything else you want to add?
no, that's it. I appreciate you having me.
No, this is great. We're gonna have you on again sometime soon. I'm sure once college hoops at least kick around, or once the Sox get going, we'll have you on to check in. And I know you're home for a week. What do you got on the docket? I know it's probably nice to be home back in Portland.
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing planned. Good friend of mine, Liam's graduating from the drill school for the Portland Fire Academy. So that's what I got going on this weekend.
Hitman One, shout out
Yeah,
Hitman One. All right, Tony, thanks, brother.
absolutely. All right, thanks.
Appreciate Anthony Tony for coming on. I mean, he's really one of the forgotten people in terms of appreciation and recognition in the Maine basketball community. He's doing sick shit, man. That USA basketball stuff. I remember one time he was just telling us about what he was doing for Team USA in the Olympics, and he's in a meeting with Steve Kerr, Eric Spoelstra, people of that nature. Like he's doing awesome stuff, interacting with some of the best people in the top people in the game. So he's doing great stuff over there. We appreciate him coming on. Let's get to the segments, man. Today on X, the NBA, and Scott Van Pelt brought it up with a rant on SportsCenter right before he really got into questions. How does the NBA not have this trade shit figured out? The fact that you're going to a different team, but because the trade couldn't process fast enough or anything, the team that traded the pick still has to draft you, and you still have to wear their hat with their logo behind you, even though you're not going to go play for that franchise. When you get in the plane the next day and fly out to wherever you're going, it's not going to be the place you wore the hat of. It makes no sense, dude. It's fucking bullshit, too. Because it's not like it ruins the kid's moment, but it's almost like it stains it a little bit. If I was getting drafted, and obviously life's not perfect, life doesn't always go your way, but I would want my draft night probably to be wearing the hat and have the logo behind me of the team that fucking drafted me. That's just me, though. So that's ridiculous. The internet is waking up to that, and the NBA is getting checked by the internet. And if I don't know if you watched Game 7, or it might have been earlier, it might have been Game 6 or Game 5. Twitter and the internet actually bullied ESPN into upping and being better in their broadcast. They showed the intros. They finally folded and made it feel a little bit more like a finals game. And where people come from in that is go turn on or go on YouTube and watch an NHL Stanley Cup final. The pageantry of it, watching, they go player by player in the introductions. It's just it's beautiful. It sets the tone, it sets the scene, and the NBA kind of lacks on a lot of those fronts. And I'm glad they're probably starting to wake up and figure it out. They got some work to do though. And another thing, while I'm on that topic, ESPN has got to look in the mirror here a little bit and fully evaluate their NBA crew, because Amazon Prime and NBC just got in the mix with their NBA rights. The crews they're putting together are incredible. Why should I listen to Kendrick Perkins when I can turn on NBC and listen to MJ or I think Melo's on Amazon Prime, or Blake Griffin on Amazon Prime? Like, Perk, man, he lost. Perk's lost the plot. That is a fact. Perk has lost the plot. So I'm excited to see these new outlets with the opportunity to attack some NBA rights. And you bet that as they're planning on how they're going to approach this stuff, they're listening to the internet. They're seeing what the people want, what the consumer wants. So I expect great coverage out of them, kind of like TNT did with hockey. TNT has done an outstanding job with their NHL rights. So I hope NBC and Prime follow suit in that. State of the Moon. No mailbag. Fucking scumbag. Send me some mailbag questions. I'm talking to you, Drew Zabarth, as you listen to this. Send me a damn mailbag question. State of the Moon. What a night in Newport. It was honestly like this sports media stuff, man, and trying to keep your head down and follow this path, in a small market TV, trying to make something of yourself. There's highs and lows, right? There are times where you're like, man, you got to stay in the fight. Maybe it's a slow day. You're not necessarily covering something you fully feel passionate about or want to cover. And then you have a night like Wednesday where it's just something out of a dream, right? I'm standing next to Marty Smith and an ESPN crew covering the same exact thing as they are. I'm there, boots on the ground, in Cooper Flagg's hometown as he makes history. And then you get to interview Marty Smith, and him and I had a great conversation. Dude, he talked to me for like 20, 25 minutes earlier in the day when we were both at the marina before we got to the draft party site. He's the best dude of all time. The best thing you could say about Marty Smith is he's exactly what you'd expect. And that's probably the nicest thing you could say about someone is you see him on TV, you're like, that guy rocks. I want to have a beer with that guy. I want to talk to that guy. And it's exactly what you would expect him to be like. He was unbelievable. He was gracious. He was engaged the whole conversation. Never once did I feel like I was bothering him. He was like telling me stories about his career, telling me stories about stuff they've done. I was picking his brain about the unbelievable stuff ESPN's doing with these majors, how he gets to sit down Roy McIlroy as soon as he wins the green jacket and gets back in the clubhouse after celebrating the win. It was just incredible. And the fact that he was gracious enough, and because I had told him at the spot we were at before, hey man, I'd love to get you on an interview. And then he's so busy doing his thing with ESPN. I'm like, man, I don't know if I'm going to get him. And like, I was ready. I was ready to ask and have some balls and actually go up and ask him. But he looks at me after he gets done his live. He just got done on the ESPN pre-draft show. People are asking for pictures, autographs, blah, blah. He looks at me and goes, oh, you need me, right? Like he remembered, man. It was the coolest thing ever. And the interview was great. And what I really appreciate about it is I would say he's one of my idols in the sports media game, as a professional journalist, where he's a perfect mix of personality and professionalism. He's the perfect mix. And he's just someone I aspire to be like. So to interview with him was cool, and met a lot of cool people that worked with ESPN and tried to network and just kind of learn what they do, what they were, what their process was like, what their certain roles were individually. It was cool, man. It was really a special moment for me in my career, and one I'll certainly never forget. Yeah, we kept it simple today. A lot of draft talk. Didn't try to, because this whole week has just been all Cooper Flagg. To be honest, I didn't even get to watch a ton of the rest of the first round because I was busy cutting a package. Post on Instagram for the first time in 3 years. Go give that a like. Go give that a like. I think I chefed up a fire dump. So outside of pandering for Instagram likes, I think I'm done. I love all you who are listening, and I really appreciate it. And we'll be back. We'll be back next week live from Cape Cod. So it's going to be a special 4th of July. Everyone enjoy your weekend.